Hi, my name is Bridget Richardson. I'm the Assistant Director of Ecumenical and Pastoral Initiatives at the Nesty Center for Faith and Culture at University of St. Thomas in Houston. And I'm here with Father John Huber. He's our Director of Catholic Education at University of St. Thomas in Houston. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Bridget. I'm very happy to be with you.
Well, Father Huber, I have been so excited to see your 4-part series that you presented to the alumni on Catholic education. And it really broke down and got into the statistics of how Catholic education has evolved in the United States. It was truly impressive if you like data, statistics, and also just, the human element as well. I just loved it.
I appreciate it. Were you able to watch all 4?
All 4. Every week I was like, what's he going to say now?
And we have quite a history, a very blessed history, but also a very challenging history. And I think quite often the current generation doesn't understand the sacrifices, the amount of sacrifices and the painful sacrifices that were made in order to get the Catholic schools going. And I always state that I don't think the sisters get enough credit, because without them, we would not have Catholic schools.
Oh, yeah. And that was very eye-opening for me. And I know Carla, who's with Alumni Relations, she shared about her experience with sisters as well. And it's such a beautiful part of our story. And being educated in that way to know the history of Catholic education, to me, is invaluable. And I feel like the people who attended, it was highly valuable as well.
And quite often people don't realize, Catholic education is older than our country itself in the United States, never mind the centuries before it existed in other places. But from the very beginning, thanks to some very daring sisters, the Holy Family sisters in New Orleans, the Ursuline sisters in New Orleans, Catholic education served minorities, it served women, it served slaves, it served recently released slaves from the very beginning from years before our country became a country. And that's an important thing that not everyone realizes.
Yeah, and it's an important conversation to be having now, especially in Houston. I know you did your doctoral work at University of San Francisco, and we'll touch on a little bit of that. But thinking about the pandemic and the state that we're in and how Catholic education has changed so much in this country, I wanted to just enter into a dialogue with you about the future of Catholic education and what that could look like. So, you can start us off wherever you feel called.
Sure. So I'm a Basilian Father, so I'm on also the General Council of the Basilian Fathers, and we oversee our Basilian schools. So we have 3 high schools in North America, including here in Houston, St. Thomas High School. We've got a high school in Cali, Colombia. We have a high school in the place where we were born in Annonay, France. And I visit and stay in touch with all of these schools. And I'm also on the board of a few other schools. And it has been challenging, especially with distance learning, to maintain the Catholic nature of Catholic education. And especially at a time when unemployment is going up. It's at 15% in our country right now and probably climbing, and will climb some more. And there's a large segment of the families in Catholic schools that are saying, is this still worth the investment? Is it worth the sacrifice? Or do we even have to take out loans in order to keep our children in Catholic schools? And is it really different now that education is currently distance learning and it's online? What are the differences? And are those differences worth it compared to when school is actually in session?
Right. And it's worth it to say that those questions are totally valid, right? I mean,
absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. If students are just logging on and doing their math homework and doing their history lessons and whatnot, and it's true in Catholic schools, they're also learning religion. They're taking theology or catechism classes. But is that the only difference, one can ask? And indeed, those are valid questions. And so when you look at the overall landscape of Catholic education, and I was a principal and a president of a couple of different Catholic high schools, we always made certain that we strove to make sure that our Catholicity and faith was not just something that was compartmentalized into a daily religion class or a prayer that began on the PA in the morning, but that it was contained in every class, every academic subject, that the academic subjects themselves were not just isolated subjects unto themselves, but that one could encounter the sacred and the holy in math class, in chemistry class, in physics, on the basketball court. And so that the faith has to be interwoven into everything that's going on in the school. You can make a better case for that when we're actually physically present in the school and we see one another and we're close to one another. But just because that physical presence doesn't continue doesn't mean that those elements still aren't there. And that the atmosphere of a classroom, no matter what the subject is, the expectations of the teacher, the expectations of how fellow students will treat one another, the spiritual nature of how one approaches any subject at all, whether it be English literature or chemistry. I still have ingrained in my mind when I was principal at Detroit Catholic Central, I used to call in students and go through their schedules and simply ask them how things were going. And I'll admit sometimes I was looking for information about a particular class, although I wouldn't tell them which one it was. I would just say, let's go through your schedule. And one kid got to chemistry class, and he talked about his chemistry teacher, who was a married lady, and he said, that lady is in love with Jesus. And it's starting to rub off on the rest of us. And I'm thinking to myself, how do kids in a chemistry class know that their teacher is in love with Jesus? Something is going on in that chemistry class that needs to be going on, indeed, in all of the classes. You know, I would insist that each class begins with a prayer, but that when certain subjects come up, that you can talk about the relationship between faith and reason, and how discovering the truth, whether it be a scientific truth, a mathematical truth, a truth in history, a truth that is expressed artistically, whether in literature or music or the visual arts, is something that can bring us closer to God and help us to understand creation. And that's something that kind of dialogue needs to take place in every single classroom. And I'm hoping that it's taking place in the online environment as much as it did when the students were actually sitting in their desks, although they might not be able to see the crucifix in front of them like they usually do in the classroom. But nonetheless, the atmosphere, the expectations, the way the subjects are treated. Now they're going to learn the same facts in as they would if they were in a public school or a non-denominational private school. But at the same time, the teachers are free and encouraged to relate matters of faith when appropriate.
And how do you see that mission or charism about Catholic school translating to people who are in situations where financial stress is happening, Catholic school administrations who are having to deal with those financial stresses as well, trying to offer that type of education?
Right. I know the schools that I'm on the board of, they were able to take advantage of that payroll protection plan, so that they're keeping their teachers actually they're on the payroll, thank goodness, already acknowledging that teachers aren't paid what they're worth, especially in our Catholic schools. But if the unemployment rate is at 15%, then probably 15% of our parents are experiencing, a loss of income. And already, on the average, about 30% of the typical Catholic school population will be receiving some form of financial assistance because they can't afford it. I know the schools are being very understanding. They're making special arrangements with families. I've heard dozens and dozens of stories. In the end, they've got to pay their bills too. They've got to balance the budget too. But these are special times, and special times merit special treatment, especially for those who are really struggling.
Yeah, and I think that one thing, I used to sell books, these study guide books, door to door. And one thing that I learned in selling door to door is that you can never decide for someone what they will pay for, right? So if they see Catholic education as a value for their family, they will figure out how to make that happen if they see it as valuable. Would you say that's the same?
Yeah, absolutely. In the end, and I remember I was actually a principal here in Houston during the 2008 downturn with the economy, and a lot of people were struggling. And I would repeat over and over again that your investments may be down in the financial markets and you may be really stressed, but the investment in Catholic education is something that will always pay its dividends. And those dividends are academic, they are social, they are moral, and above all, they're spiritual.
Yeah, and you've had to be a part of some groups that have made tough decisions on schools closing and things like that in our own archdiocese. What is it
Right.
like that going through that process?
That's very painful. You know, we do have an inner city Catholic school task force that Deborah Haney, our superintendent, asked me to serve on. And then really the pandemic and the situation that it caused was the breaking point for 4 of our local Catholic inner city schools. But the discussion, I can tell you, has always been among the good people on the task force, and they're men and women that represent all kinds of backgrounds across the board, is that we want to make sure that the needs of our students are met, including and especially those in the inner city. I know that we have the Cardinal Circle that raises funds for those schools. There have been ideas tossed back and forth about merging schools, even maybe someday building a new school. You know, it would be the easy way out just to say, let's just close those schools because they're old buildings and they don't have enough money, and the families that attend them really don't have a lot of money themselves. But that's not what Catholic education is about, and there's a lot of good people sacrificing to make sure that that happens for as many people as possible. And it has resulted in some of the schools closing, but hopefully those students are going to be served by Catholic education as best they can at the closest school to them. And that may be also that we need some creative transportation ideas as well.
Yeah, and it seems like creativity is what is maybe reigning supreme in this. How do you be creative in your teaching? How do you be creative in your Catholic identity? How have you seen some schools be creative in that? And also, you mentioned it in your presentation. How are you creative in your fundraising, right?
Well, you know, and you're absolutely right that creativity is very high in demand right now. So I'm on the board of Incarnate Word Academy here in Houston. I think the oldest Catholic school in our diocese, in our archdiocese, at least the oldest Catholic high school. They go back to 1887, I think, around there. But the principal, Mary Amott, sent to us a video of a typical day of announcements at Incarnate Word now that everything is online. And they were enthusiastic young ladies, incredibly creative in what they were doing. And they started the morning off, there was a prayer. There's a wonderful lady, Anna Paula, who is the campus minister there, who oversees all of this. There was a prayer, there were the announcements, and then they had 3 minutes of exercise. And you saw on the screen, you know, in the blocks that looks like Brady Bunch, but even more so when there's like 25, 26 blocks on the screen, you saw students and teachers doing sit-ups and push-ups and jumping jacks and getting invigorated. And then there was a little pep talk along with that. And we can do this, and we're going to have a great day. And they made sure to wish people happy birthday, whether the students or, you know, the celebration of major events in people's lives, students, teachers, faculty, staff. That's important too, because one important element of Catholic education is the whole notion of community. And they certainly have found a creative way of making sure that that community is celebrated. And just to see, I know that this weekend here at the University of St. Thomas, we would have had commencement. The psychology department is doing a drive-through graduation. And I'm supposed to be blessing the students as they come by. And I think St. Thomas High School is doing their graduation at a drive-in. So things will be big up on the screen. And the whole notion of community is so incredibly important to Catholic education and Catholic institutions that I'm impressed that students, faculty, staff, administrators are very much motivated, knowing that that has to continue in order for the true nature of a Catholic school to continue.
Yeah, and when I hear stories like that, it makes me feel warm and fuzzy, but also it reminds me of the power of the Holy Spirit and how the Spirit is constantly moving and with us. And so how do those representations give you hope and also show the triumph of the Holy Spirit in all of this?
Absolutely. Well, and I've mentioned it in some of my online homilies and my online masses that we're at a point where we have to physically distance ourselves from one another in this 6 feet thing. And you notice it when you're in the supermarket with your mask on and everything else. But Jesus Christ has not distanced himself from us at all. And that indeed he is with us. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to be celebrating Pentecost. And I think the descent of the Holy Spirit is going to be of particular significance to us this year. I even watched the other day a Catholic school that had a May crowning online. That the Mothers Club, it's a boys' school, but the Mothers Club very, very strong. This is in Michigan, and they continued that. And actually, for the first time, a lot of students were involved, not just the moms. And it's interesting, too, this is a little bit off the subject, but we are noticing, and I've spoken to pastors as well, so we have our Sunday Mass online from our Chapel of St. Basil here at the University of St. Thomas. Some of the parishes have begun Masses again, but only can receive 25% capacity into the churches as well. So the online Masses continue, both here and across the country and across the world. I've noticed, for example, I'll give you a particular example. The Chapel of St. Basil here at St. Thomas holds about 200 people. We have 3 Sunday Masses when we're in normal session. If they were full in all 3, they're not always full, but there would be 600 people. 1,800 people tuned into the Easter Sunday Mass. And pastors are telling me the same thing, that so many more students or not summer students, it's a larger community. So many more people seem to be tuning into the online Masses that actually have shown up physically present. And I know Father Jim Murphy, who's the president of St. Thomas High School, has Mass online every morning at 9 a.m. Now, the chapel at his school may hold 40, 50 people. He's getting 500 or 600 people a day tuning into this Mass. And I'm hoping that perhaps this is a means for some of the people who may have fallen away or chosen not to come to Mass, that they may actually start coming back once we're able to hit some kind of normalcy again. But it shows that despite the distancing that happens, whether it's through schools, through parishes, that people recognize the need for the intimate relationship with Christ, and that need has to be also met, not just with an individual relationship, but in community as well.
Yeah, and that community is so special. I know at University of St. Thomas, they've been really trying to make sure that community is shored up and understands we're still here for you. We're together in this. Like, we're going to, even your sessions, it felt like you were trying to bring us together in community to learn.
I know that the meetings I've sat in on, I know that all of the students the incoming students, the new students are all getting phone calls and in Zoom meetings and are invited to larger meetings of orientations and whatnot. And that personal touch is especially important right now.
And so, Father Huber, what would you say to either, administrators or families who are anxious? Money is something that makes everybody anxious. What would you say about the beauty of Catholic education in spite of that anxiety, to help people find hope in all of it?
Mm-hmm. Well, we believe that through education, one can encounter the sacred, and that education right now cannot take place in a traditional classroom sitting in the desk, but that we're learning that the important elements of education can happen. If this had happened, for example, 30 years ago, we would not have had this opportunity to have these classes via Zoom and Google and Skype and WebEx and all of those things. We're very blessed in a sense to be able to connect with one another, whether it's through education or through our families. I know that, imagine how many Zoom meetings took place on Mother's Day, for example, including with my own brothers and my own mom. But that community cannot be stifled, and it cannot be silenced, and it can't be eliminated because of the current situation that, as you were mentioning, Bridget, earlier, the strength of the Holy Spirit and the Holy Spirit's intercession in our lives. And St. Paul tells us where grace is always going to be provided in great abundance. And I truly believe that through this situation, despite, I know that some people's sleeping patterns are way off, myself, my own included, that depression is up, that people are getting on one another's nerves at home, that the parents are really struggling with the children at home because they're trying to do their work online, and the children have to be online, and sometimes there's not enough devices or strong enough Wi-Fi for all of that, and the arguments that can take place or whatever. But I think it's an invitation for each one of us to realize what's the most important for us. And hopefully the education that takes place in every school, but especially in our Catholic schools, will continue to enable one to realize that one's potential is a whole lot stronger and capable than we would have ever imagined before this specific circumstance arrived in our lives.
Well, Father Huber, I so enjoyed this conversation, and I just can't wait until you do another series on Catholic education so that I can learn more, and maybe there will be new things.
We could go on for 4 hours, couldn't we?
Yes, we could. I have more questions, but I will spare our audience. But if it's okay, I'd love to link to your dissertation that you shared. It was really insightful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much again, and have a great day.
Okay, thank you so much.